In the early 1930s, Ukraine faced a catastrophe unlike any other, the Holodomor. This man-made famine, orchestrated by Stalin's Soviet regime, led to the deaths of millions. Families starved while grain was confiscated, leaving behind haunting stories of survival and unimaginable loss. The word Holodomor means death by hunger in Ukrainian. It wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a calculated policy. Stalin's collectivization forced farmers to surrender their land and crops to the state, stripping them of their livelihoods and condemning them to starvation. Ukraine was known as the breadbasket of Europe, but by 1932, its fields were empty. Soviet officials imposed impossible grain quotas, seizing food even from starving families. Those who resisted were labeled enemies of the state, imprisoned or executed without mercy. Entire villages were sealed off to prevent people from fleeing or seeking help. Borders were closed, and food supplies were cut off. Starving Ukrainians resorted to eating grass, bark, and even stray animals. Some even faced unthinkable choices as desperation consumed them. The death toll was staggering. Historians estimate that between 3 to 7 million people perished during the Holodomor. At its peak, over 25,000 Ukrainians died daily. Entire families disappeared, leaving behind ghost towns and fields that once fed an entire continent. Stalin's regime denied the famine's existence, silencing journalists and spreading propaganda. Foreign correspondents like Walter Duranty downplayed the crisis to protect Soviet interests abroad, while those who tried to expose the truth faced threats or exile. Despite the silence, some brave voices spoke out. Gareth Jones, a Welsh journalist, traveled to Ukraine and documented the horrors he witnessed firsthand. His reports shocked the world, but were dismissed by many who refused to believe such cruelty could be deliberate. The Holodomor wasn't just about starvation, it was about control. Stalin sought to crush Ukrainian nationalism and resistance to Soviet rule. By targeting Ukraine's farmers, the backbone of its culture, he aimed to erase their identity and ensure absolute loyalty to Moscow. Survivors of the Holodomor carried scars that lasted generations. Many never spoke of their suffering out of fear or trauma. Families were torn apart, traditions lost, and an entire nation left grappling with the weight of a tragedy that had been hidden for decades. It wasn't until Ukraine gained independence in 1991 that the Holodomor began receiving global attention. Documents from Soviet archives revealed how deliberate policies caused the famine, sparking debates about whether it should be recognized as a genocide. Today, over 30 countries recognize the Holodomor as genocide against Ukrainians. Memorials stand in Kiev and around the world to honor its victims. Yet debates persist over Stalin's intent. Was it a targeted attack on Ukraine, or simply an outcome of brutal Soviet policies? The Holodomor teaches us about the dangers of unchecked power and propaganda. It reminds us how food, something so essential, can be weaponized against entire populations. Understanding this dark chapter is crucial to ensuring such atrocities are never repeated in history. The stories of Holodomor survivors are heartbreaking yet inspiring. They recount unimaginable suffering, but also resilience in the face of despair. These voices remind us that even in humanity's darkest moments, there is strength, a strength that helped Ukraine endure and preserve its identity. As we remember this tragedy today, we honor not only those who perished, but also those who fought for truth. The Holodomor is more than history. It's a warning about what happens when power is abused and silence prevails over justice. It's a story that must never be forgotten. The legacy of the Holodomor lives on in Ukraine's fight for sovereignty and freedom today. The scars of the past shape its future as it resists oppression once again. Remembering this tragedy is not just about mourning, it's about standing against tyranny wherever it arises. The Holodomor remains one of history's most chilling examples of man-made suffering. By sharing its story, we honor millions who lost their lives and ensure their memory endures. Let this video serve as a reminder. Silence enables atrocities. Awareness can help prevent them.